Let's begin with an overview of the tools and materials that I recommend you use when you're painting with fired glass enamels. There's going to be a lot of these are going to be optional items, but I think you'll find that most of them will be extremely useful. The first thing let's talk about is have a water bottle and a vinegar bottle, white distilled vinegar spritz bottle. I use water spritz bottle when I'm doing watercolor wash backgrounds, and then the vinegar is used to clean the glass. I find that glass cleaners can leave a film, alcohol can leave a film that can repel the enamels. So even if you have to use something a little bit stronger or chemical wise on top of the surface of the glass, be sure to end with the vinegar, and I think you'll save yourself a lot of heartache and problems there, because sometimes if you have a residue from a label that's left on the glass or something like that, a lot of the things won't get that totally off. So I recommend having a water spritz bottle and a vinegar spritz bottle. And it's just basically white distilled vinegar, okay? So that's all you really need to use. I don't dilute it in any way, but that's the final cleaning of any piece of glass. The next thing you're going to need is some kind of water bowl. This can be anything. I had a friend of mine, Vira Dobbins, use this ashtray mold and create water bowls for my studio space. And so I use these because one of the advantages of this particular water bowl is that I can leave my brush lay across the top without letting it stand in water, should I need to set it aside. So that's going to be something that you're probably going to want to make sure that you have, and you're able to change that water frequently. Okay, so then you know that the fired glass enamels, most of them come in powdered form, the ones that I use. Unique Glass Colors, Easy Fire enamels, Hues to Fuse, and Colors for Earth. And most of them come in jars. I know the Easy Fire and anything from Fusion Headquarters comes in a little Ziploc baggie. So you'll want to have some kind of jar system to contain the powder. It's just easier to work out of a little jar. I don't ever use any medium or carrier water or anything in my pure state dry glass enamel powders, because there's so many ways to control the use as the artist. So we'll cover that in some later on in a couple of videos. And then you're going to want to have some kind of system to actually house your enamels that you're going to add the medium to. So these are really popular. They're little trays. I think these are found at Michael's or Joann Fabrics. You want to be really cautious about the pods that you're using, okay, these little paint pots. Some plastics tend to break down and can leach chemicals into your enamels that actually can contaminate them. So while these are good for immediate use, and if you're not going to mix up a lot of color, these are great. I actually prefer the half-ounce jars that are used actually for the product, and I mix in these. You can see here my medium is kind of separated a little bit, which it does, but these are airtight. If you screw those on screw the top on real tight, there's a little pad in here that actually helps seal that. These are not going to be airtight, so your enamels are going to dry up on you much faster and become hard in the pot again. You'll have to use medium and reconstitute it. There is no waste to the products that I use. You just reconstitute with the medium or the carrier. And I use UGC's medium with all of the enamels that I use. So you'll want to have some kind of system that you can keep organized, keep your space, relatively clean and easy access to everything that you're going to use. So that's going to be really important to have. What you want to avoid is any kind of container that has a dip on the side. I know a lot of people like using glass jars, but a lot of those you can't get your tool in and actually scrape the sides and keep all of your volume of product down in one mass within it. So just make sure they're straight walled, whatever you're choosing, okay? The other thing to mix your enamels, There's a stainless steel tool available. I have these on my website, and I know there are several other vendors that carry these. I actually have covered the handle in polymer clay and baked them so that I can actually hang on to it a little bit easier, because the stem is really fine, and with arthritis or any kind of hand issues or grip issues at all, it's just easier to have that on there, and it takes just a little bit of time and baking in your oven and you're set to go. But you'll need to have this tapered, nice stainless steel tapered end to do the drip test that I'm going to cover, and that will make sure that your enamels are going to be all the same consistency or viscosity, so that when you're doing the wet and wet blending, you don't have one that's inhibiting the blending of the other by having one too thin and one too thick and gummy. So you're going to need a stainless steel tool. I use a 1/4 teaspoon stainless steel measure. This is just to reload or refill my jars or pods, but I also use this when I'm creating custom colors that I'm going to be using in a piece. And I just make sure, like in baking, that you're just using a level measure on the colors that powders that you're actually going to mix together to make a custom color, and then record that so that you're able to repeat it should you need to if you run out. Wipeout tool. This comes in really handy when you're applying your enamels to the glass surface, and you may have gone a little bit further than you want to. While that's wet, if you just kind of drag that wipeout tool and clean up that edge a little bit while the enamels are wet, that's a really good way to contain it, or move your line, your outer edge of your element. You can use either end. I only use this when the enamel has just been applied and wet, because it's just easier to clean up. I also, when I'm using UGC details with a quill pen and I need to get in a tight little spot and remove it, I just kind of rub it away, because that's just kind of dust sitting there on the glass surface. You're going to want to have, of course, some kind of straight edge or X-Acto blade. This comes in handy to get any residue off the surface of the glass from labels, any tape marks, anything like that that you need to get off the glass surface. I don't recommend using this to actually clean up lines. I'm going to cover that and how I go about that in the demonstration video. Sponges are really handy to have as well to create texture. There's just a lot of different uses, whether it be manufactured or sea sponge. I actually use a combination of both of these in many pieces. Q-tips, that's going to be something else everybody's got around the house. You can use these. These are great if you get a little bit of fingerprint or something where you have a lot of painting and some negative space in a real tight area. You can get in there and get the fingerprints off, because that happens frequently. Appetizer skewers. These come in really handy. There are many times I paint without a brush at all. I'm just using a skewer. So that is really easy to just pick up the paint, blob it on the surface of the glass, and just move it around to the desired shape or your design element. An eyedropper comes in really handy. This is great when we're going to be using underglazes or having to thin enamels down for washes or whatnot. It just helps to have one of these on hand. It's not necessary, but one of those things that comes in really handy. Scotch tape. You want to always secure, if you're using a pattern or guide underneath your glass, you always want to make sure that you're able to rotate the work, and I'll explain more about that as we go. But you want to make sure that the registration is not going to change, particularly if you're going to use patterns or designs that you're working through the glass, or looking through the glass to your design. That if you're working a multiple layer piece, you want to make sure that it's all registered correctly. So that actually prevents the glass from moving with your design underneath. So let's talk a little bit about brushes. There's a variety of brushes that I use. I teach with the Colors for Earth class brush for the most part. It's just a very good, nice length to the brush. If you take care of it, it'll hold a point. And then they also have another class brush that they have. It's a little bit shorter, and I use this when I'm working much smaller pieces or not having to work such a large area. That comes in handy. So those are the number on the brush, I believe, is 455-0. And you can find those on my website or the Colors for Earth website. I also like Paula McCoy's Simi Brushes. These come in really handy when I'm doing some watercolor wash work, some finish detailing on top of dry glass enamels, and a couple other techniques. But these are really, the mini and the small are the ones I use the most. There's a medium and a large as well. My favorite script liner brushes are Margot Clark's 5/0 and 10/0 script liners. And these are very responsive synthetic brushes that are just incredible to use. So all my detailing is done with that, whether it is UGC Details product, Colors for Earth color concentrates, or even the fired glass enamels for specific techniques. I like Margot Clark's number 5 or number 8 round sable brush to do my watercolor wash backgrounds. And I also use this quite frequently to flood in some diluted color in areas when I'm using specific techniques. And then I like Margot Clark's Miracle Brush. The Miracle Brush actually comes to a point when wet, but when you flatten it out, it's actually chiseled straight across. So it's used for mudding with Margot Clark's Mud, black or white. But I also use this a lot with my fired glass enamels. So the last thing I want to cover here on just your basic tools and supplies, wrist rests. Now, I have 2 different sizes available on my website. Depending on the size piece I'm using, there's quite a distance here. I actually can stack multiple layers that I'm working on so I can see through to make sure that my strokes and whatnot are the same on any level of glass that I'm working. But it can slide easily over your piece, and then you can also see underneath. But what I find is the struggle most people have with their when they're starting to paint with fused glass enamels, is that they're always touching the glass for opaque coverage, trying to achieve opaque coverage, touching the glass with a brush tip. You'll find that if you get used to using some kind of bridge, artist bridge or wrist rest, it is just like when you're writing a check with a pen. You always pick up your writing utensil the same way every time. Your hand position is the same every time. So once you find that sweet spot, because I pick up my brush the same every time, I put it on the wrist rest the same every time, I'm not going to hit the glass. I'm going to be able to allow that product to puddle on the glass and then skate over the surface, pushing and pulling it to the desired shape or design element. So that kind of is just a brief overview of the supplies and materials that I recommend that you have on hand to do your fired glass enamels painting. If you have just these, this is pretty much all I work with. I rarely go outside of this. I think the only thing that I would use differently would be actually my quill pens when I'm using the UGC Details and doing some fine writing or detailing. So let's move on to the next step.